So, friends, did you see that depraved clown show that Donald Trump and Pete Hegseth put on for our nation's military leadership? I am pretty darn sure it had an impact, but not the impact that Petey and Donnie had hoped. Let's talk about that, because justice matters. Hey all, Glenn Kirshner here. So friends, Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth beclowned himself in front of our nation's military leadership, both officer and enlisted, acting like he was talking to a bunch of 12-year-old kids who had absolutely no idea of what honorable military service and loyalty to the Constitution look like. And then, even worse, Donald Trump, looking and sounding like he was suffering from full-blown dementia, tried to pit the United States military against the American people, saying that the American people are the, quote, enemy from within, and telling the military leadership that they should use American cities as military training grounds. Can you imagine anything more depraved, more demeaning of our military members, or more dangerous to the American people than a U.S. president spewing that kind of garbage into the public square? But there's some good news, friends. Let's take a look at how this clown show landed with our nation's military leadership. This from Politico. Headline, quote, could have been an email. Officials balk at Hegseth's generals meeting. The last-minute gathering featured hundreds of senior military officials who swear an oath to the Constitution, attending something more akin to a campaign rally. And that article begins, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth's speech to top generals was supposed to serve as a rallying cry for military exceptionalism, but it didn't land that way with many of the people it was targeting. Numerous defense officials who watched senior brass scramble to Washington and then sit through a partisan speech from President Donald Trump and a return to old-school military standards by Hegseth were left wondering why the event had occurred at all. Quote, more like a press conference than briefing the generals, said one defense official who, like others, was granted anonymity due to fears of retribution. Quote, could have been an email. Defense officials in the Pentagon and at bases around the world spent much of Tuesday trying to make sense of the last-minute gathering at the Quantico base in Virginia. Hegseth called out, quote, fat generals, and separately pushed fitness standards that could limit women in combat roles, while Trump offered his justification for sending the military into American cities. The 90-minute event, which featured military officials who swore an oath to the Constitution, attending something more akin to a campaign rally, had the feeling of a Hollywood production. Trump even instructed officials to just have a good time. The meeting took place hours before a government shutdown and struck some officials as a distraction that threatens to shift the military's focus away from foreign threats toward an unprecedented domestic role. Quote, not quite a loyalty test, but on the spectrum of loyalty to ideology, said a second defense official. Total waste of money. Joint Chiefs Chair General Dan Kane suggested Russian and Chinese officials would worry that hundreds of American generals and admirals had gathered together, But some current and former defense officials instead feared the security risk of sticking almost all of America's top officers in the same room. And they dismissed Hegseth's effort to bolster the military's aggressive image through grooming standards and ending diversity programs. Quote, "It's a waste of time for a lot of people who emphatically had better things they could and should be doing," said a former senior defense official. "It's also an inexcusable strategic risk to concentrate so many leaders in the operational chain of command in the same publicly known time and place to convey an inane message of little merit." Some officials spent their time doing back-of-the-envelope math on ChatGPT to figure out how much the spectacle cost. Others, across military bases, chose to avoid watching entirely. Quote, "At this point, I am averting my eyes," said a third defense official. And friends, in case you're wondering how this Trump and Hegseth orchestrated debacle was viewed around the world, this from the BBC. Headline, "U.S. cities should be military training grounds," Trump tells generals. U.S. President Donald Trump has said he wants to use American cities as training grounds for the military. In an unusual address to hundreds of military leaders assembled from across the world, Trump described civil disturbances as the enemy from within. He added that the situation won't get out of control once you're involved. Of course, their involvement, the military being involved in civilian law enforcement in the streets of America, violates federal law, the Posse Comitatus Act, and degrades the capability of the military, what the military should be focusing on and training for. Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker accused Trump of using military troops and Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, to invade and disrupt U.S. cities. Our troops and our nation deserve better than you acting as a petty tyrant, Governor Pritzker posted on X. You know, friends, there are times when I think I struggle, to find the right words to describe Donald Trump's depraved, democracy-busting insanity. But I have to believe that if Trump thought that the little Petey and Donnie show would inspire the men and women of our military leadership to switch their loyalty from the Constitution to a tyrant, an autocrat, a dictator, they are dead wrong. They are dead effing wrong. I spent 6.5 years on active duty in the United States Army, and there's one thing I know. The overwhelming majority of the men and women of the armed forces believe, abide by, take deadly seriously their oath of loyalty to the Constitution and their responsibility to protect it against all enemies, foreign and domestic, like Donald Trump. And to those men and women, like to us, justice matters. Friends, as always, please stay safe. Please stay tuned. And I look forward to talking with you all again tomorrow.